The day I realized my own mother was trying to take my daughter away from me, I was standing in a family courtroom holding documents that accused me of being an unfit parent. The woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me, who I had trusted with the most precious person in my world, was sitting across that courtroom with a lawyer, claiming I was too unstable, too neglectful, too dangerous to raise my own child. And the worst part was not the betrayal itself. The worst part was that it had taken me 31 years to see her clearly, to understand that the person I called mother had never actually loved me. She had only ever seen me as competition, as a threat, as something to be controlled and ultimately destroyed. My name is Sophie, and this is the story of how my mother slowly became the villain in my life. Not overnight, not through one dramatic act of cruelty, but through years of subtle manipulation, quiet sabotage, and a pattern of behavior so insidious that I did not recognize it until she came for the one thing I could not afford to lose. To understand what happened, you need to know who my mother really is. Caroline Bennett was born beautiful, and that beauty became the foundation of her entire identity. She was a pageant queen in her youth, winning local and regional titles throughout the American South, always praised for her looks, her charm, her ability to captivate a room. She married my father when she was 22, a handsome attorney who seemed like the perfect accessory to her perfect life. They had me a year later, and according to the stories I was told growing up, that was when things started to go wrong. My mother never let me forget that her body was never the same after pregnancy. She would look at old photographs of herself and sigh, telling me about the figure she used to have, the attention she used to receive, the life she had sacrificed to become a mother. Even as a child, I understood that I was somehow responsible for her unhappiness, that my existence had cost her something she valued more than anything else in the world. My father left when I was 7, trading my mother for a younger woman, a cliché that devastated her in ways she never recovered from. The divorce was bitter and public, and my mother emerged from it convinced that she had been betrayed by everyone she ever trusted. But instead of turning to me for comfort, instead of building a bond with the daughter who needed her, she did something I did not understand until much later. She began to see me as the enemy too. The competition started subtly when I was a teenager. If I received a compliment, my mother would find a way to redirect attention to herself or undermine what had been said. If I achieved something at school, she would remind me of her own accomplishments at my age. If I showed interest in a boy, she would make comments about how I was not pretty enough, not charming enough, not special enough to keep anyone's attention. She dressed younger than her age, wore more makeup than necessary, and seemed to view every social situation as a contest she needed to win. I thought this was normal. I thought all mothers were competitive with their daughters on some level. I made excuses for her behavior, blamed her bitterness on the divorce, told myself she was just insecure and needed reassurance. I spent my teenage years and early 20s trying to make her feel loved and valued, never realizing that nothing I did would ever be enough because she did not want my love, she wanted my submission. The pattern continued into my adult life. When I graduated from college with a teaching degree, she complained that I had chosen a profession that would never make me wealthy or important. When I got my first apartment, she criticized every decorating choice and predicted I would fail at living independently. When I started dating, she found flaws in every partner I brought home, warning me that I was too needy, too emotional, too much for anyone to truly love. I started to believe her. That was the cruelest part. Years of her voice in my head had convinced me that I was fundamentally flawed, that any success was temporary, that any happiness was borrowed time before inevitable disappointment. I developed anxiety, struggled with self-esteem, and went through a series of relationships that ended badly because I could never quite believe that anyone truly wanted me. Then I met David. David was the father of Lily, my daughter, and our relationship was brief and ultimately painful. He was charming at first, attentive and romantic in ways I had never experienced. My mother approved of him initially, which should have been a warning sign in retrospect. He came from money, had the right connections, and treated her with the flattery she craved. She encouraged the relationship, pushed me toward commitment, and seemed genuinely pleased when I announced I was pregnant. But David revealed his true nature once Lily was born. He was not interested in being a father. He was not interested in building a family. He had wanted me during the exciting parts, the romance and the passion, but the reality of a newborn was more than he could handle. He left when Lily was 4 months old, offering minimal child support and even less emotional investment. I was devastated but not surprised. My mother had always told me I was not enough to keep anyone. What did surprise me was my mother's reaction to David's departure. I expected sympathy, support, the kind of maternal comfort I had always craved. Instead, she seemed almost satisfied. She told me she had known David would leave, that she had seen it coming, that I should have listened to her when she tried to warn me. Except she had never warned me. She had encouraged every step of that relationship. She had pushed me toward the man who would eventually abandon me. I did not understand then what I understand now. My mother wanted me to fail. She needed me to fail, because my failures made her feel better about her own disappointments. My broken relationship proved that she had been right all along, that love was a trap, that men always leave, that the only person I could ever really count on was her. And for a while, I believed that too. After David left, I moved closer to my mother, partly for practical support with childcare, and partly because I was too broken to imagine any other option. She helped with Lily during those early years, and I was grateful for the assistance even as I began to notice patterns that troubled me. My mother treated Lily differently than she had ever treated me. She was affectionate, doting, endlessly patient with my daughter in ways she had never been with her own child. At first, I was relieved. I told myself that maybe she had learned from her mistakes, that being a grandmother was giving her a second chance at the maternal warmth she had never shown me. But gradually, I began to see something else underneath the sweetness. My mother was not bonding with Lily. She was competing for her. The comments started small. She would say things to Lily like, "Grandma understands you better than anyone," or "You can always come to me when mommy is too busy." She would undermine my parenting decisions in subtle ways, giving Lily treats after I had said no, extending bedtimes when I was not looking, creating a dynamic where she was the fun grandmother and I was the strict, boring mother. She began to position herself as Lily's primary attachment figure while slowly pushing me to the margins of my own child's life. I confronted her about it once, gently, trying to express my concerns without triggering her defensiveness. Her response chilled me. She told me I was being paranoid, oversensitive, that I was jealous of the bond she shared with Lily. She accused me of trying to keep my daughter from the one person who truly loved her. She cried, played the victim, and made me feel guilty for even raising the issue. I backed down. I always backed down. That was the dynamic we had established over 31 years, and I did not know how to break it. Then Marcus came into my life, and everything began to change. I met Marcus at a school event, a fundraiser where he was donating his architectural services to help design a new playground. He was kind and funny and seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not just as a potential conquest or a project to be fixed. We talked for hours that first night, and when he asked for my number, I felt something I had not felt in years: hope. Our relationship developed slowly because I was cautious, because I had Lily to consider, because I did not trust my own judgment when it came to men. But Marcus was patient. He understood my history without pressuring me to share more than I was ready to reveal. He adored Lily and treated her with respect and genuine affection. He seemed like everything I had never believed I deserved. My mother hated him from the moment they met. She could not say why, not in any concrete terms. She simply did not like him, did not trust him, thought there was something wrong with him that I was too blind to see. She warned me that I was making another mistake, that I was being foolish, that I was putting my daughter at risk by bringing a stranger into our lives. She cried about how I was abandoning her, how I was choosing a man over my own mother, how I had always been selfish and ungrateful. I listened to her concerns because that was what I had been trained to do. But for the first time in my life, I did not let them stop me. Something about Marcus made me brave enough to question the voice in my head that sounded exactly like my mother. I started to wonder if maybe she was not trying to protect me. Maybe she was trying to control me. That was when the real war began. The changes were subtle at first. My mother became less available for childcare, claiming health issues and prior commitments whenever I needed help. She started making comments to Lily about how mommy was always busy with her new boyfriend, how grandma missed her, how things used to be better before Marcus came along. She began documenting things, though I did not know it at the time. Taking photographs of Lily's messy room, saving text messages where I vented about parenting stress, collecting evidence of every moment I fell short of perfect motherhood. She was building a case against me, and I had no idea. The relationship with Marcus continued to deepen, and I moved in with him when Lily was 5. It was the right decision for our family, a loving home with a man who treated both of us with kindness and respect. But my mother saw it as the ultimate betrayal. She had lost her grip on me, and she was not going to let that stand. The first formal complaint to Child Protective Services came 6 months after the move. Anonymous, supposedly, but I knew immediately who had made it. The allegation was neglect, claiming that Lily was often dirty, hungry, and unsupervised. A social worker came to our home, inspected our living conditions, interviewed me and Marcus and Lily. They found nothing concerning. The case was closed. I confronted my mother, and she denied everything with wounded outrage. How could I accuse her of such a thing? She loved Lily more than anything. She would never do anything to hurt our family. I was paranoid, suspicious, turning into exactly the kind of unstable person she had always feared I might become. I wanted to believe her. Even then, even with evidence pointing directly to her, I wanted to believe that my own mother would not try to take my child away. So I apologized for my accusations and tried to repair our relationship, telling myself that maybe it had been a neighbor or a jealous coworker, someone else who had made that call. The second complaint came 3 months later. This time the allegations were more serious. Emotional abuse, exposing a child to domestic violence, creating an unsafe environment, another investigation, more interviews, more scrutiny of our lives. Again, they found nothing to substantiate the claims. But this time, the social worker said something that stayed with me. She told me that in her experience, when multiple unfounded complaints came in about the same family, it usually meant someone was weaponizing the system against them. She suggested I might want to consider who in my life might have a motive to do that. I knew. Deep down, I had always known. But hearing it from a professional gave me permission to finally face the truth I had been avoiding my entire life. My mother was not just difficult or competitive or insecure. She was actively trying to destroy me. And she was using my daughter as the weapon. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed how my mother would pump Lily for information after our visits, asking leading questions about what Mommy and Marcus did at home, whether they ever yelled or fought, whether Lily ever felt scared or sad. I noticed how she would give Lily scripts to repeat, telling her to say certain things to her teachers or to the social workers if they came back. I noticed how she had positioned herself as Lily's confidant and protector, the one person who truly understood what was happening in our home. She was coaching my 7-year-old daughter to build a case against me. And the most terrifying part was that Lily did not understand what was happening. She loved her grandmother. She trusted her. She repeated what she was told because she believed she was helping. The documentation I started gathering was painstaking and painful. I recorded conversations with my mother where she made statements that contradicted her claims to authorities. I saved text messages where she threatened to fight for custody if I did not give her more access to Lily. I collected testimony from teachers and neighbors and family members who had witnessed her manipulation. I built my own case, brick by brick, preparing for a war I had never wanted to fight. Marcus was my rock through all of it. He researched grandparent rights laws in our state, connected me with attorneys who specialized in parental alienation cases, and held me while I cried over the childhood I had never really had. He helped me understand that what my mother was doing had a name, that there were patterns of behavior that experts recognized, that I was not crazy for seeing what I was seeing. Dr. Helen Chambers was the therapist who finally helped me understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. She specialized in family systems and had served as an expert witness in custody cases involving parental alienation. When I described my mother's behavior, she did not seem surprised. She told me that what my mother exhibited was consistent with narcissistic personality patterns, that the competition and manipulation and need for control were not random, but part of a larger dynamic that had probably shaped my entire life. She helped me trace the patterns back to childhood, identifying moments I had normalized that were actually deeply unhealthy. She explained how my mother had systematically undermined my confidence, my relationships, and my sense of reality because she needed me to remain dependent on her. And she predicted what would come next. She told me that when narcissistic grandparents feel they are losing access to a grandchild, they often escalate dramatically. They file for custody or visitation rights, make increasingly extreme allegations, and attempt to use the legal system to maintain control. She warned me to prepare for exactly that scenario. She was right. The custody petition arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, hand-delivered to our home by a process server. My mother was seeking emergency custody of Lily, claiming I was mentally unstable, that Marcus was abusive, that my daughter was in immediate danger. The attached affidavit contained allegations so extreme, so false, so carefully constructed to destroy me that I could barely breathe while reading it. She claimed I had a history of mental illness that made me unfit to parent. She claimed Marcus had been violent toward Lily. She claimed I had neglected my daughter's medical and educational needs. She included statements that she said came from Lily herself, describing a home life of chaos and fear. Every word was a lie. But lies, told convincingly enough and documented carefully enough, can become a weapon capable of destroying lives. The months that followed were the hardest of my entire existence. We retained a family law attorney who specialized in defending against false allegations. We requested a guardian ad litem to represent Lily's interests independently. We submitted to psychological evaluations, home studies, interviews with every authority my mother's attorney demanded. We opened our lives to strangers who would decide whether I got to keep my own child. My mother's case was built on years of preparation. She had documentation I did not know she had been collecting. She had statements from people I thought were friends, but who apparently had concerns they had never shared with me. She had crafted a narrative so detailed and so damaging that even I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was not a good mother. Maybe I was too damaged by my own childhood to raise a healthy child. Maybe Lily would be better off with someone else. Marcus pulled me back from that edge every time I started to fall. He reminded me who I really was, showed me evidence of my own good mothering, helped me see the manipulation for what it was. Dr. Chambers worked with me on strategies for staying grounded when my mother's tactics triggered old patterns of self-doubt, and slowly I began to fight back. The first breakthrough came when we subpoenaed my mother's phone records. Her attorney had claimed she had no contact with the CPS reports, that she knew nothing about the anonymous complaints. But the records showed calls to the state hotline on dates that corresponded exactly with the reports. She had made those calls. She had lied under oath about making them, and now we had proof. The second breakthrough came from Lily's therapist. We had started Lily in play therapy after the allegations began, wanting her to have a safe space to process what was happening. The therapist documented how Lily would repeat phrases that did not sound like they came from a 7-year-old, scripted statements about feeling unsafe that she would deliver and then forget moments later. The therapist testified that in her professional opinion, Lily was being coached. The third breakthrough was the most painful because it required me to become someone I had never wanted to be. I had to tell the truth about my mother in a public courtroom. I had to describe the years of manipulation, the competition, the systematic undermining of my confidence. I had to explain how she had isolated me from friends and family members who might have seen what was happening. I had to admit that I had allowed it to continue for far too long because I desperately wanted to believe my mother loved me. The testimony took an entire day. I cried. I struggled to maintain composure. I felt like I was betraying my own flesh and blood, even though she had betrayed me first. But I told the truth, every painful detail, because my daughter's future depended on people understanding what kind of person they were dealing with. Dr. Chambers testified as an expert witness, explaining the dynamics of narcissistic parental alienation to a judge who had seen countless custody disputes. She walked through the patterns of behavior, the escalation timeline, the coaching of the child. She explained how grandparents who exhibit these tendencies often present as loving and concerned while actively working to destroy the parent-child bond. My mother's attorney tried to paint me as the unstable one, the vindictive daughter who was punishing her mother for minor conflicts. But the evidence we had gathered was overwhelming. The phone records proving she had filed the CPS complaints, the text messages threatening to fight for custody, the therapist's documentation of coaching, the statements from neighbors who had witnessed her undermining my parenting, the timeline showing her escalation corresponded directly with my increasing independence from her. The judge took several weeks to issue a ruling. Those weeks were agony, not knowing whether I would keep my daughter, not knowing whether the system would believe my mother's lies or see through them. I could not eat, could not sleep, could not focus on anything except the unbearable possibility of losing Lily. When the ruling came, it was more comprehensive than I had dared to hope. The judge denied my mother's petition for custody entirely. More than that, she restricted my mother's access to Lily, requiring any future contact to be supervised by a professional. She noted in her written opinion that the evidence suggested Caroline Bennett had engaged in a pattern of harassment and manipulation designed to undermine the plaintiff's parental rights. She recommended that Lily continue therapy to address the effects of the coaching she had experienced, and she warned my mother that any further attempts to interfere with my custody could result in criminal charges. I read that ruling in my attorney's office, surrounded by people who had fought alongside me, and I wept. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that. I wept from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming realization that I had won. My daughter was safe, my family was protected, and my mother had finally been held accountable for what she had done. The aftermath was complicated, as aftermath always is. My mother did not accept the ruling gracefully. She wrote letters to family members painting herself as the victim, claiming I had turned the courts against her, insisting she had only ever tried to protect her granddaughter from a dangerous situation. Some people believed her. Relationships I had maintained despite everything finally crumbled under the weight of choosing sides. But other people saw the truth. Relatives who had suspected something was wrong for years reached out with their own stories of my mother's manipulation. Friends I had lost touch with reconnected, explaining that my mother had systematically driven wedges between us. I began to understand just how isolated she had kept me, how carefully she had controlled my relationships to ensure I had no support system outside of her. Lily required months of therapy to process what had happened. She was confused about why she could not see Grandma the way she used to, why supervised visits felt so different from the close relationship they had shared. But her therapist helped her understand in age-appropriate terms that sometimes adults make choices that are not healthy and that keeping her safe was more important than anyone's feelings. Over time, Lily began to heal. She stopped repeating the scripted phrases. She stopped looking to me with suspicion when I set boundaries. She started to trust that our home was safe, that Marcus and I loved her, that the chaos and fear Grandma had described were never really there. My mother requested supervised visits for a few months, but she could never make it through a session without attempting to manipulate or undermine. She would make comments to Lily about how unfair the situation was, how Mommy had turned people against her, how someday things would go back to normal. The supervisor documented each incident, and eventually my mother stopped requesting visits at all. She could not tolerate a relationship where she did not have control. We have not spoken in over 2 years now. Sometimes I feel guilty about that. Despite everything, she is still my mother. There are moments when I miss the version of her I wished she had been, the nurturing presence I always wanted and never truly had. I grieve the relationship we might have shared if she had been capable of genuine love instead of just possession and control. But I do not regret protecting my daughter. I do not regret telling the truth about what happened. I do not regret breaking the cycle of manipulation that might have continued into another generation if I had not found the strength to stop it. Marcus and I got married last spring in a small ceremony surrounded by people who genuinely love us. Lily was our flower girl, scattering petals with the unself-conscious joy of a child who feels secure in her world. When I looked at her that day, I saw everything I had fought for. A little girl who would grow up knowing she was enough. who would not spend her life chasing approval from someone incapable of giving it, who would understand that love should feel safe, not competitive. Dr. Chambers told me once that children who experience alienation attempts can grow up remarkably resilient if the targeted parent handles the situation correctly. By maintaining calm, by not criticizing the alienating grandparent in front of the child, by providing consistent love and stability, we can help them process what happened without becoming defined by it. I have tried to follow that advice, even when it was hard, even when I wanted to explain to Lily exactly what her grandmother had done. She will learn the full truth someday, when she is older, when she can process it with the understanding of an adult. I have documented everything in a letter I keep locked away, explaining what happened and why I made the choices I made. I want her to know that I never kept her from her grandmother out of cruelty. I kept her safe because that was my job as her mother. The truth about my mother came slowly, over decades of small revelations and painful recognitions. She did not become a villain overnight. She had always been one. I just did not have the language or the perspective to recognize it until she threatened the one thing I could not afford to lose. Becoming a mother myself taught me what motherhood was supposed to look like. Feeling that overwhelming love for Lily, that fierce protectiveness, that willingness to sacrifice anything for her well-being showed me exactly what had been missing in my own childhood. My mother had never felt that for me. She had felt ownership, perhaps, competition, certainly, but not the unconditional love that wants a child to thrive and grow and eventually surpass their parents. Some people have asked me whether I could ever forgive my mother. Forgiveness is complicated, and I am still working through what it means in this context. I do not hold active hatred in my heart. The anger has faded into something more like sadness, a grief for the mother I never had and the relationship we will never share. But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It does not mean pretending the harm never happened. It does not mean giving someone the opportunity to hurt you again. My mother made her choices. She chose control over connection. She chose competition over celebration. She chose trying to destroy me over trying to understand me. And those choices have consequences she will have to live with for the rest of her life. The consequence is losing me, losing Lily, losing the family she might have been part of if she had been capable of genuine love. She will grow old without grandchildren's birthday parties, without holiday dinners, without the simple joy of watching the next generation flourish. That is not a punishment I imposed. That is the natural result of her own actions. I used to believe that family was everything, that blood connections trumped all other considerations, that we owed loyalty to relatives regardless of how they treated us. My mother trained me to believe that because it kept me tethered to her, no matter how badly she behaved. But I know now that family is defined by love and respect, not just genetics. The family I have built with Marcus and Lily is more real than the one I was born into. When I look back at my childhood now, I see it clearly in a way I never could while I was living it. The subtle competition, the constant criticism, the way every achievement was minimized and every failure magnified, the isolation from anyone who might have offered perspective, the programming that convinced me I was not enough, would never be enough, could never survive without her. It was all designed to keep me dependent, to ensure I would never leave, to make her the center of my universe forever. Breaking free from that programming was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the custody battle, harder than the court testimony, harder than cutting contact with my own mother, because I had to unlearn 31 years of believing I was fundamentally flawed, fundamentally unworthy, fundamentally incapable of building a life on my own terms. Therapy helped, Marcus helped, time helped, but mostly Lily helped. Loving her taught me that I was capable of the kind of love my mother had never shown me. Protecting her taught me that I was stronger than I had ever been allowed to believe. Raising her right, breaking the cycle, refusing to repeat the patterns I had grown up with these things, taught me that I was not defined by my mother's failures. I could be someone different, someone better. This is my story, but it is also a warning. The villains in our lives do not always look like villains. Sometimes they look like the people who are supposed to love us most. Sometimes they disguise their control as concern, their competition as protection, their manipulation as maternal instinct. Sometimes we do not recognize them for what they are until they threaten something we cannot afford to lose. If you are listening to this and recognizing patterns from your own life, I want you to know that seeing the truth is the first step. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not betraying anyone by protecting yourself. The person who is supposed to love you unconditionally, but instead makes you feel perpetually inadequate, is not acting out of love. They are acting out of their own damage, and you are not responsible for fixing them. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to limit contact. You are allowed to choose your own well-being over their expectations. You are allowed to build a family that treats you with respect, even if that means leaving behind the family you were born into. My mother slowly became the villain in my life, but she does not get to write the ending. I do. And the ending I have chosen is one where I am free, where Lily is safe, where love looks like support instead of competition. The ending I have chosen is one where the truth matters more than loyalty, where healing is possible, where the cycles of dysfunction stop with me. That is my revenge, if you want to call it that. Not destroying my mother, not humiliating her, not seeking justice through punishment, just living well, just being happy, just proving that everything she said about me was wrong by building exactly the life she told me I could never have. I have a partner who loves me. I have a daughter who is thriving. I have a career that fulfills me and friendships that sustain me and a peace I never believed was possible. I have broken free from the voice that told me I was not enough, and I have replaced it with the truth that I always was. My mother does not have access to any of that. She does not get to share in my joy or watch Lily grow or celebrate the milestones she once tried to destroy. That is not cruelty. That is consequence. That is what happens when you spend decades treating your child as a rival and then try to take away her greatest love. I am Sophie. I was raised by a woman who saw me as competition instead of daughter. I survived her manipulation, protected my child from her schemes, and built a life she told me was impossible. If you are in a similar situation, I hope my story gives you courage. The truth takes time to reveal itself. The villain takes time to become visible. But once you see clearly, you can never go back to blindness. And in that clarity, you find freedom. This is my freedom. This is my peace. This is the life I chose instead of the one she designed for me. And it is more beautiful than she could ever understand.